Telling incredible stories and keeping the past alive, Moondog Productions is proud to bring you the great history of the House of David in Southwest Michigan. Find out more about Moondog Productions by going online to moondogpro.net.
The House of David Museum is proud to tell the stories of Southwest Michigan's rich history. Located in St. Joseph, Michigan, the House of David Museum has a wide array of memorabilia for your viewing pleasure. To schedule a tour, call 269-325-0039.
Production support provided by The Blueberry Store, downtown South Haven, Michigan. The Blueberry Store offers all things blueberry, from gourmet blueberry products, fresh and frozen blueberries, as well as recipes. The Blueberry Store can be found at theblueberrystore.com.
Telling Southwest Michigan's history through radio and podcast. Rob Bird's Moondog Show and the House of David podcast are happy to be a part of telling this great story. Find Rob Bird's Moondog Show or the House of David podcast at podbean.com.
The story of the House of David has fascinated the minds of millions for over a century. It was a place in Michigan that was surrounded in mystery, religion, romance, baseball, travel, sex, scandal, and huge wealth. It was all based on a religious colony that called themselves the House of David. Their leader and founder, Benjamin Purnell, preached that if you followed him, you would have eternal life of the body and live forever on earth. Converts traveled to Benton Harbor, Michigan from all over the world to be a part of this colony and see for themselves what was being touted as paradise on earth. Many spoke of the feeling of being at the gates of heaven as they arrived to trumpets and bands playing. Everyone in beautiful attire, magnificent horses and carriages, opulent mansions to call home. The new members gave up all worldly possessions in exchange for everlasting life, and the House of David grew and grew. What began in early 1903 as a new and exciting Christian faith soon became so much more. In this film, we will explore and chronicle the rise and fall of the House of David and the efforts to preserve its history and legacy. This is the House of David, Life Everlasting.
Benjamin Purnell was born in Paducah, Kentucky in 1861, and he was born to a very destitute family at the time, the beginning of the Civil War. They had no money to basically raise their own kids. He was the seventh son in the family, and the story goes that his father used to give fire and brimstone speeches around the campfire at night, and very powerful sermons that he taught his kids. And the history shows that Benjamin's oldest brother took him on kind of as his own son, basically, because he was way down in the lineage of the family. And on his 14th birthday, his brother gave him a copy of the King James Bible and to read out of. And Ben memorized it front and back. He had a photographic memory. And he embraced that Bible like it was his whole world. And that's what got him the fuel started for his belief in God and Jesus and Christianity. And he took off on the road as a 16-year-old young guy, very charismatic and highly intelligent person, and he wanted to be an itinerant preacher. So he had a covered preacher's wagon that he traveled throughout the South and into the Midwest with, preaching what he said was the Word of God. And he came across the teachings of people that had come way back in the 1700s of the same type of Christian Jesuit faith. And the first one being Joanna Southcott, who started the faith, and then James Jezreel, John Rowe from Australia. But all these people laid the ground for the first through the sixth messengers, all preaching that the seventh and final messenger from God in this lineage of beliefs was going to come to the New World. And of course, we know the New World as America.
Benjamin had been married before, and the circumstance of his separation and divorce is still debated. And it just depends where you're coming from, how you're going to interpret all of that. He had a child by that first union. That child survived the 2 children that he had with Mary.
He fell in love with Mary when he was about 16 years old. She was also from the area, and fascinating, beautiful lady, kind of had a little bit of an American Indian look to her, extremely charismatic, extremely intelligent. And they had 2 children, Coy and Hetty, and that's how they started their life together.
They were married in Aberdeen, Ohio, which happens to be right across the river from where my wife was born and raised in Maysville, Kentucky. Now, there a little smut novel came out in 1960 called The King of the Harem Heaven. It was written under a pen name for obvious reasons. It was not very credible, but was it interesting? Absolutely. In that novel, it mentioned that Mary was from Maysville, Kentucky. And when I talked about the colony, I had fun with this because no, she wasn't. My wife was. Mary was not.
And Mary was very supportive of Benjamin and his teachings, and actually she took great notes. So I give Mary, and most of history gives Mary the credit for having Benjamin's teachings in book form, because she's the one that wrote them all down as he talked and gave his sermons. She was there to dictate all that.
Ben and Mary's life together was a romance made in heaven. They knew their lives were forever to be servants of God.
They had been a part of a commune in Detroit called the God House under Prince Michael Mills. And there had been a sort of a dust-up within that colony. And Benjamin and Mary left the colony with their 2 children. And they, as they tell it, they wandered for 7 years. But they were preaching. They were preaching this idea that Benjamin was the 7th messenger and that the day of reckoning or the millennium is close at hand. They wind up in Fostoria, Ohio, where they gathered a few converts to their way of thinking.
They called it the God House, and they teamed up with Cora and Silas Mooney from Ohio, who were very wealthy corn farmers at the time. And the Mooneys joined forces with Ben and Mary and kind of a partnership with them. And they footed the bill to take all of these teachings to print. So that's the first time that Ben's word was actually in book form.
James Jezreel was that 6th messenger, and he had written some extracts about the belief that Benjamin and Mary had absorbed also. Well, there were Jezreelites living in Benton Harbor, the Boschke family, and Benjamin and Mary had been in contact with them. Now, a disastrous thing happens to the family in Fostoria. Their daughter, Hetty, was killed in a factory accident, an explosion. They were already in contact with people in Benton Harbor, and Benton Harbor looked like a good location for them to start this colony. And when the people, the community of Fostoria, became upset with thinking that Benjamin and Mary didn't properly attend to the funeral of their daughter.
I read a newspaper article on it, where I guess they were right ahead of the crowd when they left. They wouldn't claim the body. They were basically run out of town because of that. The city itself had to bury their daughter Hattie.
Their thinking was that they thought if you believe, you're going to live forever. And of course she didn't. So there's some animosity in the community, and they take that as an opportunity to move to Benton Harbor. and join up with the Boschkes.
They had just invented the first automobile a few years before that, and the Boschkes were part of the sixth church, of which Benjamin was teaching that he was the seventh messenger from God. The Boschkes had heard about Benjamin being in Ohio, Fostoria, Ohio, and having his own church called the God House there. And they invited him to Benton Harbor, Michigan, where they would team up with him to finance the beginning of the House of David Park and the House of David Faith, which started in the spring of 1903.
Right away, they're able to start building, farming some land. They had a few followers that came with them and a few that they gained with the Boschkes, etc. And one of the first buildings that they built was, I don't think they named it the Ark. I think the neighborhood Gentiles named it the Ark, thinking of Noah and the end of time coming. But that was their first dwelling there in Benton Harbor in 1903.
Benjamin taught that you had to be a vegetarian, very much like the Shakers, Christian. The vegetarian lifestyle meant no meat, no alcohol, no smoking cigarettes, and abstain from sex. So they did live a life of celibacy.
Part of Benjamin and Mary's preaching was that if you follow us as the seventh messenger, you will have an eternal life.
He would have giant crowds that would gather and listen to his teachings because he was extremely well informed about the Bible and could argue his teachings against other faiths and prove his points to people all along the way. And so she, it was a beautiful story that they traveled together from Kentucky all the way into Michigan.
The story that led Ben and Mary to Benton Harbor was a story of providence and passion.
Early on, the Australians landed because of the word being spread to them that he's here, and they were all studying under John Rowe, which was another messenger before Ben. They flocked in. I have pictures of like 4 teams of horses and carriages loaded up with people coming out of the outback to head to the ship canal to head to America. And then, of course, there's a famous picture of 85 Australians that joined on the same day, coming out of the ship canal in Benton Harbor, heading to the House of David. And they're playing musical instruments and singing. And amongst those people were actors and actresses and vaudeville talent. And so as people flocked in, they not only had massive amounts of members, but they had massive wealth, massive talent in music and all kinds of industries. And so that's how they grew and grew. They built so much. They had their own steamships and trolley cars and bus lines and hotels and restaurants and vegetarian restaurants and a park hotel. And they built the amusement park with the help of the Australian people that came in because of their brains. They knew about that type of thing.
Men of God are not typically known for making great entrepreneurs, but Ben had a vision, and this vision turned into a worldwide endeavor that had a massive impact on the entire world.
They recruited people from around the globe. They recruited a lot of highly intelligent Einstein-type brains that were extremely successful, many of them extremely well off, some of them just great workers, iron workers and farmers and artists and musicians. So they didn't really have specific guidelines that they said this person can only qualify. They would sit you down and they would ask you your story, and then they would ask you 14 questions about your faith and would you believe in Benjamin as your long-awaited Messiah.
You would correspond with them at their headquarters, and they would, if they felt that you were a good possibility for membership, they would issue a call to come home. And as a matter of fact, in those early days, around 1910, they had they had to tell people, wait until you get the call. There were several people that were wanting to come to the House of David, and they did evangelize. They sent out mission carriages. They sent out 4 men one time in a boat, a power boat, that went down the Mississippi, across the Gulf of Mexico, up the Atlantic coast, up the Hudson, Erie Canal, rode over 6,000 miles, and they were evangelizing all along the way, spreading the word.
I think what happened is that the preacher sounded compelling enough for them to come and, check out what the House of David was, because that was in, the year before. And so when they came, they were here for a week. They came up by train. It must have just seemed like a paradise to them, because farming is hard work. But then when you have people and it's a working colony and they're all together, and they all have a purpose and all of this, it just seemed right to them.
The purpose that drove these people was so powerful that they gave up all their worldly possessions to the colony. In return, all their needs were met as long as they were being productive and contributing to the overall health of the community.
You're giving up everything. When an Israelite says, my shirt, he means our shirt. Everything was held in common. So they gave up all worldly possessions when they joined the House of David. And then their living was taken care of, and they gave and did whatever they could. There are contracts, and in the book that I wrote, I published some of those contracts showing what they would give up and what they would agree to. So, it looks legal to me, but as we know, what's legal is sometimes it changes.
In exchange for giving up all your worldly possessions, you had to give your life to this cause. You had to do anything that they asked you to do. And one thing in history shows that if you and I had certain talents that we really didn't expand on prior to the House of David, but we had those hidden talents, they could find that out in us. And if you were really a sculptor, and right now you're a musician and a filmmaker, but really in real reality you were a great sculptor, they would find that out. They would give you a team of artists around you with the money and the housing to create something world class. So your sculpting abilities would become known throughout the world.
I think there's some truth in it. And I think that's true of Sister Mary also. She had the ability to suggest to people like Andrew Ferguson, who came all the way from New Zealand just about a year before she died. And according to Andrew, he told me, she said, your place is on the Rocky. Well, he thought that was to go out to the Rocky Farm down near Berrien Springs and work. Well, he wound up at Sister Mary's Fireproof Hotel in downtown Benton Harbor, and that's where he worked, and he really enjoyed it down there, had a good time.
And that's what they did with all of their members. They figured out what they were best at, and they raised that to the highest possible spot. And people loved living there. They loved their lives there. I've interviewed hundreds of people, thousands of people actually related to this story, but hundreds of people that were part of this story straight attached to it, and they absolutely loved life there.
They had several musical groups, singing groups, jazz band, those kinds of things that they also became popular, and they also toured. As well as the baseball team, of course. And traveling with the baseball team, they would have people that would be disseminating literature and evangelizing as they went along.
I asked them, other than Ben, what was the biggest point and the turning point of the story of the House of David. And they told me that they thought it was the arrival of the Australians. Because when Australia joined the rest of the group, they brought with them so much musical talent. Some of the most famous musicians on that part of the world came to join the House of David. So at that time, they brought music to the House of David, and which means that equates to orchestras and bands and vaudeville shows and jazz bands and syncopep bands and blues bands and ukulele bands. And so they formed all these bands and all this music to be played down in the amusement park.
The amusement park that would eventually see over 35 million visitors was never intended to be a national attraction. It just grew to become one. What started with an ice cream store soon grew to an amusement park with trains, midget race cars, a beer garden, a zoo, and so much more. It was a paradise that caught the attention of so many.
It grew extremely rapid in the early days. And by 1908, they had purchased land from Eastman, Colonel Eastman, and they had this idea that they were going to build an amusement park. Part of the reason was they had an ice cream parlor behind their Jerusalem building, and they were already attracting curiosity seekers. And that ice cream parlor was becoming an attractive nuisance. So if we could put it across the street in an amusement park, we can sort of kill two birds with one stone. We can make money on the tourist, and we can create housing and so forth for the impending ingathering. One of the most attractive, fairly regular event that would take place, and I think they took place on Monday nights, Chick Bell had an amateur hour, which was actually more than an hour, in which anyone, could try out and come and put their particular talent on display. And of course, Chick Bell would give you a flamboyant introduction and all that kind of thing. That went over very well.
Very early on, when the Australians came, they had a zoo in Australia. So one of the things that they wanted to add to Eden Springs was a zoo. So they brought they had a lot of the Australian animals shipped over by boat to come to the House of David Zoo. And then with the help of their folks here, they brought in some pretty phenomenal animals and built an amazing zoo, and which is a big attraction. And they did that all the way until 1944. And it was right after the war ended that the government stepped in and said, okay, hang on. You can't have a zoo right here. You have a restaurant right here, right next to it. And you serve food. And we're not going to allow that. So they stopped. They shut the zoo down. They donated all the animals to the Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago, and they didn't have a zoo again. But they had monkeys and tigers and a big, beautiful bear cage and exotic animals, and they had exotic bird cages that were amazing birds and things like that from Australia. But it was a big attraction.
My dad lived there, so I was pretty much over there ever since I was born. We would go to the horses. They had a little pony ride, and the little ponies were all hooked up in a little circle, and you could sit on the pony and just walk around in a circle, which was exciting when you're 3 years old. And when I was 3, my dad decided I begged him to let me ride on the go-karts. And so I'm riding in this go-kart, and of course I'm just flooring it because I'm 3 years old. And Hans Daliger was the one who was running it, and he comes running over trying to stop me, and I ran over his foot and broke his foot. And so my dad didn't let me ride on those for a really long time, but I will never forget that because it was so fun.
That park grew and grew and grew.
Most all of the zoo is completely gone now, except for the big lion cage building, and that's being restored as we speak. It's a beautiful building that's built on the far east corner of the amusement park, right next to the railroad. Marlon Perkins was a big part of that, helping Chick Bell with the zoo and eventually helping move the animals.
The nostalgia of the trains has been encapsulated in so many hearts and minds. Those that visited the park made memories that would last a lifetime. And for the House of David, the explosion of the amusement park fueled further growth and passion for the faith.
I remember everything about those trains. They were so, my dad was an engineer on the train, so of course I knew that my whole life growing up. And even to have him, like on a special occasion, would, you know, take the train around the park. And, just, you know, it was just like flying down the track. And I can still even hear it in my head when they'd get to the little crossing guard at one of the bridges, and there'd be a little dirt path that went across there, and he would blow the train whistle before they'd go over the trestle, you know, and it was just, you know, there's like 4 whistles all together, but just going over it. And sometimes I can still, if I think about it, I can hear it. And then it would go around, and then it would pull into the South Depot, and you'd get out and, you know, go check out all the souvenirs. There were so many. The souvenir stands were huge, and they had so much stuff, but it's like they sold, you know, the hydrostone and pennants and, you know, the souvenir hats and all kinds of things that they had in there. Just postcards. I've got tons of postcards that I still have. And just so many things. And then you could buy ice cream and popcorn, and the ice cream was amazing because they made it from their own dairy cows, you know, and the ice cream parlor with the little chairs with the little, you know, circle backs, the little wire circle backs. When I think about the magic, it's the people. Definitely the people, because everybody was having a good time and everybody had a smile on their face, and there was so much laughter and chatter, and, you know, and people would just, you know, it was just such an amazing feeling of togetherness. There was a lot more togetherness at that time. So there was like never a stranger. I mean, the park might have been full of people from everywhere, but you were all doing the same thing and you were all enjoying the same thing. It was just a feeling of camaraderie between people.
Once the music started happening in the park, they had so many thousands of people that were coming to feel that, to experience that. They needed a way to transport those people into the park. And so Ben and Mary visited, along with some other House of David folks, visited the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. And they experienced the fact that the Cagney brothers out of New York had built these small steam engine trains to transport passengers for whatever reason. Ben and Mary loved that idea. So after the World's Fair ended in 1904, they actually bought one of the steam engine trains from the Cagney brothers. They sent some House of David guys to New York to bring it to Benton Harbor, where they had their engineers, and they had a team of engineers that were world-renowned. Their guys took it apart, every piece. They reinvented these steam engine trains better, faster, put them together, and they had 8 steam engine trains that were little passenger trains that they built their own largest railroad in the world for miniature trains, 15-inch gauge, which is a very nice, comfortable train. At that point, it really, really took off because they could transport so many people back into the park. Trains ran all day, every day, one behind the other, behind the other, behind the other. People would load at the North Deep Train Depot, where they could get a ice cream cone made by the House of David, where they made their own ice cream. They could board the train, go for a ride, half-a-mile ride back into the amusement park. They deboard the train at the South Depot. They could see the zoo. They could ride little ponies. They could drive the little, they call them midget race cars, which were like little Indy cars from 1930. They were a replica of the Indy car. They could watch the orchestras and the nightly shows and the daily shows. And from there, it was like Disneyland. I mean, it's been related to Disneyland on a million different terms. And Walt Disney came there in the late 1940s and studied the layout and the way things worked because it had become so famous by then. It was the second leading amusement park in America. And he loved that idea. So he studied the park, the layout of the park, and I've talked to the people at Disneyland and the Disney history and the fact that Walt Disney bought one of the first House of David trains, had it shipped back to Anaheim for himself, and had a railroad built in his backyard. So, you know, they touched so many lives. It was a huge, huge attraction that they didn't really intend it to be world famous for an amusement park, but it just became that.
Even though the House of David members were forbidden to take part in the consumption of alcohol, that didn't stop them from building a new beer garden after Prohibition was lifted. This was now another boom for the House of David and the amusement park, which was now becoming even more popular.
And as soon as Prohibition was lifted, the House of David, of course, opened their beer garden there, and that was extremely popular too. In fact, the first time I personally ever heard about the House of David, I was seated in a chemistry class that I didn't have much interest in. And the fellow sitting next to me, a kid by the name of Don Otto, said, "What are you doing this weekend?" I had kind of nothing to do. He said, "Let's go down to the House of David." I said, "What's that?" He says, "I don't know, but they serve beer to minors. We can do it." I never got there.
They were very entrepreneurial people, and Ben loved, I guess, risk. You wouldn't think that religious order would, but he was all about very successful enterprises. And at the time, alcohol was abolished. You couldn't serve alcohol. Now here you have, 500,000 people a year coming to the park. They're getting entertained by music. They're staying at the park. They're coming to the zoo. They want to drink. They can't drink. Lloyd Gallagher told the story that he very clearly remembered Al Capone visiting the park with all of his guys. And Lloyd was not only was a catcher for the baseball team and ran the power plant, but he also drove the trains, one of the trains. He loved the trains. And he said, Chris, back in the day, for some reason, he would be the one that would be asked to drive Capone and his guys around the park. And so he said that Capone would offer him money to take his baseball cap off so he could see his braided hair. And he said in the morning, the young guys, because they got picked on so much by tourists because they had such long hair, they would braid each other's hair real tight, wrap it around the top of their head and put their big poofy ball cap on. And that would hide their long braided hair. And that's, so he said, look, Chris, that Al Capone would always plead with me, sell me your ball cap. And he wouldn't do it. He refused to do it. But he said he was told just to take him around the park. Don't ask any questions, just take him around. So he didn't know exactly why that involvement was there at the House of David Park, but we do know that history shows that the House of David was the first one to serve alcohol after Prohibition was abolished this side of the Mississippi River. And that was the biggest boom that money could bring to the park. And so instantly when Prohibition was abolished, that's when the House of David Park just went wild. They created what they called the beer gardens, which was a elaborate building right next to their beautiful amphitheater building. And they could serve all these hundreds of thousands of tourists alcohol. And to this day, there's a little, what we found when we bought the amusement park in 2009 was a little jail that was built into the side of the beer garden's hillside. So Lloyd said, Chris, there was a lot of people that would get unruly. And for one, he said, if your chin was taller than the bar counter, we'd serve you. So if you wanted to drink, you probably drank. And he said, and we didn't want to get the authorities involved. So if people got super intoxicated, they would either offer to get them home for no charge, or if they got really unruly, they went into the jail. And there's bars on there. Matter of fact, my daughter for her senior year got pictures taken in the bars. But and the jailhouses were way deep inside the hill, like tunnels, like caverns, men's and women's. And he said, we just let them sober up. We never called the police on people. We just put them in there until they dried out, and then they went home. But it was a big part of, I think, attraction during those years was that people could go there and drink comfortably and be entertained, and first place in America almost.
In 1914, Benjamin formed a baseball team, the likes of which have never been seen before. These players all had long hair, long beards, and were considered to be some of the greatest players to have ever played the game.
They had a few good players. Few guys were pretty good at baseball.
Ben noticed there's a whole lot of them that are super talented, athletic guys. So they had this family, the Talley brothers, that came from Arkansas that were great baseball players. And he thought, you know what? He loved baseball himself. Why not form a team? So he formed a team of what he thought was the best baseball players in 1914. And part of the rule is that at the House of David in general is you don't ever cut your hair, and men can never shave because he's supposed to be in the likeness of Jesus. And they quoted a scripture in Leviticus because of that reason. So the men never cut their hair shaved. And so by the time the boys got there, a lot of them came from other parts of the world already believing in this faith. So the boys had long hair, which is very unusual, right? So they start playing baseball in 1914. By 1915, they won the Michigan State Championship in baseball. By 1917, they're featured in the Spalding Baseball Digest, which is like the Bible of baseball, right? By 1919, they're on the front page of the New York Times and the front page of almost every major media across the country. Here's this crazy oddity of a baseball team, guys with long hair and beards that are busting everybody's chops. They're beating everybody. By 1920, they were winning 70-80% of their games, and they're playing like 140 to 160 games a year. So by 1920-21, they're the biggest draw in baseball.
People in the community of St. Joe and Benton Harbor, people that I had given talks to and things like that, they would want to tell me about going over to the House of David and watching a baseball game or a donkey baseball game or a game between Rube Foster's black team, Negro team. I think they were out of Chicago. They just had a great time.
Well, the House of David are one of baseball's greatest attractions. And whether they were playing a local town team or a Negro League team, the thing that the House of David, they were unusual. And they were good ball players. So you're talking about the golden age of semi-professional baseball. And so the House of David could come in, and it's going to be one of your biggest draws of the year.
They made quite an attraction. And, you know, especially I'm thinking of like in St. Joe, Benton Harbor, the community was really looking forward to seeing the Negro team play against the House of David team. And the Negro teams also often would have a comedian or do crazy things. And like Cool Papa Bell, he could steal almost any base he wanted to, and may have been one of the fastest base runners in all of baseball. But they made quite an attraction.
Well, when I think of the House of David, this whole era of baseball that they participated in, you've got to tell the stories. And if you want a young woman to maybe get involved in sports, they need to hear the story about Babe Ditcherson. And of course, that connects to the House of David, right? If you want to hear the story about a Major League Hall of Famer who's hanging on and barnstorming after the end of his career, you got to tell them about Grover Cleveland Alexander. If you want to hear the story about race relations, this House of David team playing these African American teams in towns and cities all across America, you've got to talk about the Negro Leagues. So the House of David plays a significant role in baseball history. And one thing that I know for a fact is that, and I learned this many years ago, all of baseball history is not the major leagues. The major leagues is only a small portion of what really went on and why baseball is our American national pastime. And so if you want to talk about baseball, you don't talk about the House of David, I'm sorry that you're not covering the subject very well.
Their teams would go on to win almost 70% of their games, with many years playing over 160 of them. The House of David didn't just have great teams, they had great ideas. They knew how to market their talent and provide great fun as well as exceptional baseball to their fans. They used promoters as well as anyone to let the public know when the House of David was coming to town.
They had a promoter that would schedule them, much like with scheduling concerts and things like that today. That promoter would be in contact with places and then would put together a schedule so that they didn't have to drive too far between games. And he would go ahead and he would put up advertisements. The House of David is going to be here, famous long-haired team come to town, never lost a game, a century, whatever, crazy things. And in some towns, they would look forward to that every year. And they would close down. Businesses would close and the House of David was coming. Everybody go out and see the game. So they had it well organized. And believe me when I say this, when Grover Cleveland Alexander's team, one of them, well, the one that he was managing, played against the Negro Leagues, they teamed up with the Kansas City Monarchs, and they played for, over a month against the same, they would be billed as Grover Cleveland Alexander against Satchel Paige, and they would pitch the first 2 or 3 innings, those two guys.
Well, the House of David actually started playing against black teams before 1920 when the Negro League started. So they were already playing teams out of Chicago, the American Giants, the Chicago Giants. They were already playing those teams. So there was already association, a connection to the Negro Leagues. And most people don't realize how far back that relationship goes. So yeah, it predated the original Negro National League. So they're part of that era where you go back to Chicago City League and those games they would take during the week that weren't part of the league, they could go out to Benton Harbor, or the House of David would come into Chicago. So yeah, it started early. And of course, when the 1920s came, it continued. First of all, in 1929, you have the Depression, and it pretty much destroys that first Negro National League in the West. So by 1931, the Kansas City Monarchs are kind of barnstorming, but by 32, they're out of it completely. And so they're able to play teams like the House of David and actually take them on the road and play a series of games with them, not just one game here. And so it became a great connection. And I might also mention the Kansas City Monarchs in 1930 were pioneers of night baseball. So they had the lights that they could put on the trucks. And so they were a touring light show. And they went to towns all over America. The first night baseball game ever played in Pittsburgh's Forbes Field was with those lights, the Kansas City Monarchs touring lights. They played against the Homestead Grays.
By the 1930s, the House of David teams were so famous that people were impersonating the House of David teams. So they're getting guys together, super athletes, telling them to grow your whiskers. We're going to put House of David on your uniform. We're going to play ball and travel the world. And so at one point there was like 5 and 6 teams. They called them imposter teams that were fake House of David teams traveling around America. I still think that's part of the history. I don't consider them not part. That was a good part. And so here's a bunch of fake House of David guys, not real talent. And so what happened was, in the beginning, they thought, you know what, we're going to just franchise these teams. We're going to make some money off these guys trying to act like us. And so they franchised like the Lewis Murphy and Ray Doan and Whitty. And these guys were big time promoters in the 20s and 30s, and they knew how to make money and they knew how to round up a crew of guys. And so they said, okay, you guys, you can call yourselves House of David, but pay us. And they did that for a while. Well, then ultimately they had to get a New York Supreme Court injunction against anybody. And the court ruling was, you can't just grow whiskers and play baseball and call yourself House of David. You can grow whiskers, you can play baseball, but you can't call yourself House of David. So they did get like a court injunction, but Lloyd said because of technology back then, there's no way to catch people. So the only way would be like they'd show up to play your team and your folks would go, you guys were just here 2 weeks ago playing us. No, it wasn't us.
And there were some people like a guy by the name of Sid Pollock. Most people may know him from later on with the Indianapolis Clowns. He was the owner of the Indianapolis Clowns through the 50s and the 60s. But in the 1930s, he tried to capitalize on the House of David name, actually in 1931, and he put together the Cuban House of David. And Ray Doan took him to court in Council Bluffs, Iowa, and sued him. So he had to stop using the House of David name. It was a trademark, and when you heard the House of David, you thought about Benton Harbor. You thought about good baseball.
Our boys are out here on this Western tour, so keep your eyes open. You'll have to keep them open if you expect to win, because you can never tell what these miners and Western cowboys got up their boots. So bear down. Bear down hard. Keep your eye on that old ball and have lots of pep, boys. Come on, let's go.
The House of David stopped touring, barnstorming, in 36. I think that was the last team that was on the road. But they still would have a local team that would play there at the grounds. It was a moneymaker. You know, they would bring in local teams and play against them, and it was fun. Now, they were never as accomplished players as the teams that had gone on the road. George Anderson went on the traveling team in 28. Now that was an interesting year. The House of David was in an internal turmoil at that time, and Thorpe put a team on the road, and Dewhurst put a team on the road. Well, going along with Thorpe was George Anderson and Doc Talley and John Tucker. And they weren't the only Pepper team, but they were one of the best, I think. Now, the Pepper game is often misunderstood. Initially, it was a bunting game where a batter had 3 people in front of him, and a person would pitch the ball and he would bunt it, and the next person would field it and pitch it and he would bunt it, and he had to bunt it to the people in order, and it was to practice your bunting skill and your location of bunting. Well, the House of David expanded upon that, and they dropped the batter because they found out that doing sleight of hand things were really tantalizing to crowds, and they were flipping the balls behind their back over the shoulder, and you know, they're flying around. Pretty soon there are 2 or 3 balls flying around, then the balls disappear and they can't find them. They're running around, people are laughing, and then they find it under somebody's whiskers or, you know, behind their head. That really set the tone. They do that halfway through the 4th inning, and everybody looked forward to that Pepper game.
The House of David, next to the Negro Leagues, were the greatest attraction outside of the major leagues. So if you put the Negro League teams, any of the teams, and the Monarchs weren't the only ones that played them. And then of course, when you're House of David in the East, they're playing House of David teams in the East, right? So anytime you put a Negro League team with the House of David, you're bringing two top attractions together. And so the House of David are more important than people have been giving them as far as their contributions, not only to Negro League baseball history, but to Major League Baseball history. There were guys who went straight from the House of David to go to the major leagues. And of course, Grover Cleveland Alexander, you can't tell his story without talking about his tenure as a manager and pitcher for the House of David. You know, one thing about Grover Cleveland, and I might go back to Ray Eldon. Ray Eldon booked the House of David in 1931, and every night people wanted to see Grover Cleveland Alexander pitch, but no man can pitch every night. So he would come and pitch one inning, and then the next night he might not pitch. And so they would come out to the game and maybe coach the third baseline. They were disappointed because they wanted to see him pitch. And then of course the local ball players, everybody wanted to say they got a hit off of Grover Cleveland Alexander. So they were lined up, man, it was the biggest thing. And so the House of David, vastly underrated for their contribution. And telling the story of the House of David is like telling the story of Major League Baseball or telling the story of the Negro Leagues. It's vastly important that we continue to talk about this team.
Traveling from town to town isn't an easy life, but these men of the House of David relished every minute. This unique part of baseball history certainly helped shape and mold the game we know today.
They kept baseball alive. The House of David, through playing, and traveling to towns and things like that, they were a moneymaker for those towns as well, not only for the House of David. So sometime the House of David coming in, it's going to be the biggest gate of the year. And so people look for the House of David to come in. People knew who the House of David was. Today it's kind of ironic. I talk about the House of David and there are people who never heard of them. But back in that time, if you knew anything about baseball and you didn't know anything about the House of David, you need to go sit down somewhere because you really didn't know anything about baseball. The House of David was just that famous. And so they had no problem getting top players that were not part of the colony because their reputation, and they knew they were going to make money. And a ball player, if he wanted to hone his craft, he could go out with the House of David, play with them a whole year or whatever. He's going to bid with Ray Eldon. Ray Eldon is connected to Major League Baseball. And if you got anything, you could go somewhere right from the House of David and not even be a member of the colony.
The House of David baseball team wasn't just a bunch of exceptional baseball players. They were also entertainers. From the pepper game to donkey baseball, over the years, the House of David teams gave every fan an experience far greater than just another baseball game. It was a show.
Donkey baseball was their promoter's idea. Matter of fact, Ray Eldon, I've seen things, actually he promoted the Dizzy Dean tour. And they came to interview Dizzy, and Dizzy was busy, and he tried to get them to interview him. He said, I'm the creator of donkey baseball. And the reporter who wrote the story, he said, I thought that was pretty interesting. He said, I almost fell for it. But Ray Eldon, out of Muscatine, Iowa, invented donkey baseball. But remember, he's the promoter of the House of David team. So he brings this into the House of David, and they use it as an extra attraction. So, for instance, 1934, the Dizzy Dean Tour, they played the Kansas City Monarchs in Wichita, Kansas. After the game, they have a donkey ball game. So people stood around for the donkey ball game just as much as they did to see Dizzy and Daffy Dean. And of course, Dizzy and Daffy Dean are two of the greatest pitchers in the world, 1934. So the donkey baseball rivaled the Dean boys. And that's a Ray Eldon, their promoter idea. And of course, he could institute it. And I've seen pictures with Grover Cleveland Alexander riding on the donkey. So it was just another interesting way to get people to the ballpark. They had to be creative. People just didn't come because they were good baseball players. They came because they were good baseball players who could do so much more. And so when you came to see the House of David, you were in for a real treat. And donkey baseball was one of those treats.
I never met a person at the House of David or City of David didn't want to talk about baseball. And fortunately for me, one time when I was over there visiting Melvin and Hubert Tucker, their brother, John Tucker, was visiting from Florida. Now, John Tucker, he was the clown prince, if you will, of the House of David. And I didn't really know. I didn't have an introduction to him, but I just suspected this is John Tucker. What a gregarious kind of guy he was. And we started talking, and he wanted to talk about baseball. And he said, let me give you a little. He asked me this question. He says, look, can you run from first to second or second to third? Which can you run the fastest, from first to second or second to third? Now, I had to think about that because I hadn't heard this. Maybe you have, and he said, nah, you can run from first to second a lot quicker. Why is that? Well, there's a shortstop between a second and third, And he said, let's go a little bit further here. Let me give you a little bit of my philosophy of life. I've had a good life. He says, look, don't bring work home with you. Don't try to live on a liquid diet. Go to bed the same day you got up. And learn to hit the curveball. His philosophy of life. It did him well. They named a street after him. Tucker Drive in St. Joe was named after John Tucker. He was one player, and I gave a picture or two of Tucker and others to the Baseball Hall of Fame, and that's why they gave me my lifetime pass to the Hall of Fame.
Alec, how do you like it here with the House of David Baseball Club?
I've liked it fine down here this spring, Dave. I've had a nice spring, good training, taking the baths and the water. Really, I believe that I got in shape quicker than I have for a number of years. Do you think this water in this bath has any effect on your hair, make it grow longer or thinner, or come out easier, or anything like that?
Yes, it's very good.
Well, I don't have to be bothered with long hair unless I want to, so if we get where there's no barbers and run out of Gillettes, well, I may have a beard one of these days, too.
They used to say it.
Well, they used to say all I need was a shave and a haircut and I was ready to pitch. Well, all you boys with your beards and long hair, I don't even have to shave now to get ready. I can just walk out there and start pitching.
Yes, that's right, Alec.
I'll give you a low target there, Eb. That's the boy.
Despite the antics and players not being very well known, the House of David attracted so many fans to see first-class baseball. Often packing the stands, the House of David was still the hottest ticket in town.
It's not like a major league team where you can go in and you can see the box scores and if you go to see this team, it's going to have these certain players on it. So the players weren't as well known. And they knew that it was going to be good baseball because the House of David recruited these great players. So they couldn't get you there on the players' names, and unless it was Doc Talley or somebody like that. But otherwise, people didn't know who was on the team. So by using the House of David name itself, they made the House of David name stand for something. And so all of these things were part of what the House of David stood for. And so whoever was on the House of David, you knew you were going to get that pepper game. Like say, you might get the donkey baseball during the 30s, right? And but you were going to get good baseball, and even though you didn't know who they were till after they left. And so it was a great marketing that they had, and a lot of that can be attributed to Ray Eldon. 1934, the House of David enters into the Denver Post Tournament, one of the most prestigious tournaments in the country. And that same year, the tournament allowed their first African-American team, the House of David. So Grover Cleveland Alexander wanted to win that tournament right along with Ray Eldon. And of course, they had been traveling the country. And they knew the Monarchs had a good team because Monarchs beat them most nights. So they said, how can we get this $5,000, which was the prize, a lot of money in the Depression? So they decide they're gonna add 2 players to their team. They wire back east and they wire for a catcher by the name of Bill Perkins. And then they also sign a pitcher by the name of Leroy Satchel Paige. So Leroy Satchel Paige joins the House of David. He didn't have to grow a beard or anything. He's only there for the Denver Post tournament. And he comes in, and basically the Monarchs lose 2 games in the tournament. Both those losses were to the House of David.
Playing baseball wasn't just a way of life for these Diamond Warriors. They loved it, and so did the fans.
If you do your homework in baseball research, you'll notice that the biggest crowd ever to hit these major cities across the country and minor cities across the country was when the House of David played their team. Philadelphia, St. Louis, doesn't matter, Podunk, Iowa. If you research what's the biggest crowd ever to come to all those towns in the 1920s and early 30s, it was when their team played the House of David. So that took them to a whole different level.
Telling incredible stories and keeping the past alive, Moondog Productions is proud to bring you the great history of the House of David in Southwest Michigan. Find out more about Moondog Productions by going online to moondogpro.net.
The House of David Museum is proud to tell the stories of Southwest Michigan's rich history. Located in St. Joseph, Michigan, the House of David Museum has a wide array of memorabilia for your viewing pleasure. To schedule a tour, call 269-325-0039.
Production support provided by the Blueberry Store, downtown South Haven, Michigan. The Blueberry Store offers all things blueberry, from gourmet blueberry products, fresh and frozen blueberries, as well as recipes. The Blueberry Store can be found at theblueberrystore.com.
Telling Southwest Michigan's history through radio and podcast. Rob Byrd's Moondog Show and the House of David podcast are happy to be a part of telling this great story. Find Rob Byrd's Moondog Show or the House of David podcast at podbean.com.
The House of David had holdings all over the world, but one of the most important was an island in the middle of northern Lake Michigan. Ben saw the opportunities that came with the lumber industry and knew the power he had behind the members of the colony.
Ben bought a place called High Island back, I think about 1909, and it's a 2,600 acre island out in the middle of Lake Michigan, just past Beaver Island. There's 3 islands, Hassel Island, Beaver Island, and High Island off the coast of Charlevoix. And he bought the island because he wanted to get into the exotic timber business. Because Michigan was the leading leading place in America for really high-end furniture, mainly because of the Grand Rapids furniture industry. High Island was known to have amazing virgin timbers of exotic timbers that weren't grown anywhere else, especially to that size and that quality. I have the original deed that he had from High Island that I bought at auction. So he bought that island because there was a sawmill there already. And the island was inhabited by Native American Indians. And so when the House of David took over that island, they moved a lot of their really talented lumber guys there, and also their farmers, because you could grow, instead of growing a potato like that, you could grow a potato like that. And so the fruit industry was like off the hook, like Galapagos Island stuff. Mind-blowing, right?
I made the mistake once upon a time. I'd been invited to give a lecture, and they wanted to know what we should title it. I said, title it House of David Penal, or no, Siberia of House of David. Well, I shouldn't have titled it that way, because obviously my lecture, if you listen to what I had to say, it was not a Siberia or a penal colony ever. But one of the people that was listening or not listening became very irate at the end. How can you do this? How can you call this a penal colony? All that kind of thing. But they had, as they bought that, the lumbering rights on that island, and that isn't their first attempt at that. They had already had a very profitable lumbering operation just north of Beulah, Michigan, on the mainland, shall we say. But that had petered out. A cedar forest had petered out. They were looking for more. 1912, they get the lumbering rights, and they bought 80 acres of land outright there on the colony, on the island. They, since the initial logging, or people up there to start some logging, there was an old sawmill there that they renovated and got everything going, and they will make that a profitable business. By 1914, that is a profitable business. They even had their own steamship that they had purchased to haul lumber back and forth.
And so they sent these groups of guys on their cruise ships. The Rising Sun and the Morning Star would sail, and even Roosevelt was a tall sail ship that the House of David had at the time. They would send their people up there to work on High Island and run these sawmills, and they had cabins that they stayed in. They had a schoolhouse that they kept their kids educated. And the Native American Indians that were on High Island had traditionally hated the white man and sabotaged what they tried to do on High Island. They embraced the House of David as the holy man. So somehow the House of David got the point across that we're not going to harm you, we're going to help you. And so the Native Americans that were on High Island actually gave their labor free to the House of David. House of David in turn taught the Indian kids in the schools and taught them about God. And so it was a beautiful thing.
They first went to school in the church, but then together, the natives and the Israelites built a small school next to the church. And natives went to school there along with the House of David young people almost always. And I think always. I never had a report of a young Israelite woman going to school there. In fact, of people that did not want to go to the island, as you can imagine, young teenage girls did not want to go to that island. There were a few younger girls that had gone, and some girls went up on a visit at times, ostensibly for a vacation, but that, of course, gets debated too. So it was usually young boys. And the school they had went up to the 8th grade.
The people back home at the House of David Park or the House of David Farms, if they got a little bit unruly or they didn't follow the rules, strict guidelines, they would get a warning. Well, maybe they would get 2 warnings. And then at the second warning or the third warning, they go, okay, you're going to get on the cruise ship. You're going to get on the Rising Sun, and you're going to go to High Island. And you're not going to come off. That's it. You don't come off. There's 60 miles of water between High Island and the mainland. So it's, the media call it the Siberia of Michigan. I interviewed people that lived on High Island with the House of David, and they said it was like a paradise. They loved it. So it wasn't really a penal colony in a way. I mean, it was a way to discipline people, but they ended up loving life.
One of the most cherished possessions that I ever received was from Melvin Tucker. In talking with Melvin Tucker in the rest home that the City of David had right there on their grounds, Melvin Tucker gave me a Christmas card, which was about a 2-inch by 1-inch card, just a little card, Christmas card that was given to him by his teacher in that one-room school.
But it was a disciplinary island, so you got sent up there, and if you wanted to eat, you had to work. You didn't get to eat for just standing around. They would make you work, and then you would earn your keep at night. And that went on. There's definitely stories in history that I've discovered that there was a number of females that got sent to High Island because they were pregnant. And of course, that wasn't supposed to happen. And then the coroner report of Charlevoix County would say this girl died of eating poison mushrooms. I'm not quite sure about all that dark part that happened up there, but it did happen. You know, there was people, they were sent there to not come home. And the story, there's fascinating stories that Ramon Nelson told me, that wrote the book called Island Life, Island Toil. And he loved it there. He lived there. And then he came home, I think in maybe late teens, early 20s. And he said that every winter, there was 2 boys assigned to, when the lake froze over, every winter there was 2 boys assigned to go out and cut off little pine trees and plant like a path, like Hansel and Gretel. So and they would dig holes in the ice and they'd plant these pine trees so they would have a visual to get over to get the mail. And they would go, their job was to go get the mail in Charlevoix and bring it back to the House of David. And he said there was a few times that those boys, the blizzards would hit unexpectedly. How do you know? We don't have a weather channel back then. So they're on their walk or their run or whatever, sled to get the mail in the mainland, and they would not come back. They'd disappear. So he said, sometimes we didn't know if they chose to not come back, or maybe they hit the train and they left and didn't come back, because I have stories of that too. Or they just got blown away and lost out in Lake Michigan and never to be found again. After Ben's death, they shut down, and so they pulled all the people back to the House of David, and it sat there for quite a number of years. And then in 1953, a guy by the name of Warren Townsend, him and his father had this mammoth furniture industry in Grand Rapids, making really beautiful, elaborate furniture. They bought the island from the House of David. I interviewed Warren Townsend, and I have it all documented, the whole story. Thank God, the guy was even alive. He was in his 80s when I called him, and the son. And he said, Chris, it was an unbelievable story. And we bought the island for really cheap. The House of David just wanted their money back. There was a beautiful sawmill there. And he said, we started there working, getting the exotic timbers. It was very grown up. He said, but the Indians hated us. And they hated us, and they told us to go home. And we bought the island for the reason of the lumber. And he said they didn't want us there, so they sabotaged our sawmill and burned it down to the ground. So he said we paid to have a state-of-the-art sawmill built on the mainland, and it floated it over and installed the new sawmill a couple years later on High Island. And guess what? They burned it down again. And he said after that, we were like, we're done. We donated it to the DNR, and that's where it sits to this day. So, I had people come in just 2 weeks ago. I don't know if you saw it, but a guy had gone to High Island a lot of years ago. And still the big docks where the steamships would pull in to load the lumber, the pieces of the dock were still there. All the dwellings were gone. But around the dwellings were still, like, the daffodils still come up around the outside of the houses, and the flowers still come up on the trails through the woods. But there's no buildings. But he said that they found this huge spike where they built the steamship dock from, and he donated it to the museum. So if you go there, it's just a deserted island now, but there is definitely evidence of life there at one time.
Life at the House of David may seem like the perfect utopia, and as close to paradise as most can imagine, but life has a way of changing direction in an instant.
He held a lot of power. He was a very, very controversial person because he was an oddity, because he was teaching something that was outside mainstream American faith and religion, and because he pulled people from all over to believe in him. He became a major target in a multitude of ways. So even by the late teens, people were coming after him with a bullseye on his head and trying to sue him for all these different reasons, and monetary gain, and accusations of improprieties, and accusations of doing things with females that they weren't even allowing anybody else to do. And so he dodged the bullet. Because in 1918, one of the members that joined was a retired Supreme Court judge from California, Harry Dewhurst. extremely powerful Einstein brain, knew the law better than anybody probably in the country, maybe. He could defend Ben, right? So Ben is dodging these bullets and dodging these bullets.
Well, they were alleging that Benjamin had taken indecent liberties with young women in the colony. In fact, the closed-in car on the miniature train, there was one closed-in car that was called Benjamin's car, and he was often seen with young girls in the car, taking them for a ride around the park. So that accusation did come up, and ultimately the Hansel family won a settlement of a fairly significant nature back in that day and age. A curious thing about that too, at the same time that Hansel trial was taking place, a trial was taking place in St. Joe at the courthouse. Some communists had been broken up in the sand dunes down near Bridgman several months earlier, and there was a trial for criminal syndicalism that took place, as I say, in St. Joe, called the Bridgman Red trial. And that's supposed to be the birthplace of the American Communist Party, because the Communist Party decided, why do these things in secret? And with code names, and this was supposed to be a singing retreat in the sand dunes, which of course it wasn't, but that was very sensational. So the newspapers in St. Joe and Benton Harbor were separating the big accounts. One day this trial, one day that trial.
It was a time of turmoil for Benton Harbor and the House of David. The members of the colony continued to live by Benjamin's teachings even as the colony came under more and more scrutiny from the outside world.
They didn't drink. They were totally celibate up to a point. You know, after a certain point, you know, I noticed that, you know, some of the members had wives, and they had wives when they joined the colony, and they stayed married. At some point, I don't even know at what point the celibacy thing went away, you know, or cohabitation, let me put it that way. I don't know about the celibacy part, but the cohabitation part, you know, if they lived together or not. Now, my great-grandmother never lived with my great-grandfather. That I do know. And he died in 1938 of a heart attack. So they held on to that, and that was even after Ben Purnell died. So they still practiced that no matter what. But their children all got married. In fact, their daughter, Bessie, was married in one of those mass weddings that Ben Purnell did. And she was married to this young man for a couple of years. And they had moved out of the colony. And I don't know what happened after they moved out of the colony, but when she came back, she went straight to the sheriff.
Continued allegations of misconduct mounted, and the authorities were forced to look into the House of David and Benjamin Purnell.
She had gone to the sheriff to report that Ben Purnell had basically been molesting other girls in the colony, including herself. He had an inner circle, and this is something I've known about my whole life. So I've always known about this story. Once my great-grandmother figured out what was going on, she knew what was coming. And the reason she knew what was coming is because her older sister is my grandmother. And she had been invited into the inner circle. And, you know, apparently that didn't bother her. You know, it was something special. And she lived in the Diamond House, and it was great. And, you know, she had a much freer lifestyle let's say, because I know that they had sent her to the East Coast on like whatever special trips. She got to do things that the other people didn't get to do. But she didn't stay there that long. And then when Aunt Bessie was older, 15, and they separated. Well, they separated the children when they got to the house of David in the first place. But at this point, they separated mother and daughter to where they couldn't talk to each other. So there was kind of like a little thing going on there, and then that's how Bessie actually was brought into the inner circle, because she didn't have her mother there to protect her anymore. And because of that, that separation, they sent my great-grandmother to High Island for a year. And I have heard people say that it was basically a place to send somebody to punish them, but it was punishment, and it was separation. And she was there for a year. And so, whatever happened with their daughter Bessie at that point, there was literally nothing she could do about it, because they would just send her back.
The House of David was in turmoil, and it was about to get worse.
Well, salacious accusations about Brother Benjamin and the House of David go back quite a ways, but it really came into focus in 1923 in the Hansel trial. It took place in Grand Rapids, incidentally. The Hansel family, a large family, had come to the House of David a few years earlier and then had become disgruntled and wanted to be paid for the time they spent at the House of David, and wanted to have the value of what they had given to the House of David returned to them. And that kind of exploded and resulted in this court case, as I say, took place in Grand Rapids. And during that particular proceedings, a civil action, there were things that weren't directly related that came up. There were testimony and affidavits that were given that alleged this happened and that happened.
Around 1920, 21, the House of David and Benjamin Purnell were world-renowned. They were written about in every major media around the world, not just Michigan, not just America, but global. He definitely became a target for jealousy, for spite, for political reasons, because he held so much power and so much wealth. If he wanted to have somebody voted into office in Michigan, he for sure can do that. And how many people can do that? And today, probably nobody. Had mega wealth. Had tens of millions back in 1920. 1922, the feds are after him, the sheriff's after him. The prosecuting attorney wants him because these Bamford sisters and these people, a lot of females are teaming up against Ben at that point, saying that he took privileges that he shouldn't have taken. And that's a whole nother story, but there was a lot of heat on Ben at that point. Not only that, he was, they accused him of operating a religion under false pretenses for personal gain, because he kind of lived like a king. Even though the media called him King Ben, you're supposed to call him Brother Ben. That was what he wanted to be called. But he was very, he lived a very royal life. And so he kind of put a target on his own head, I think. And they were after him hardcore. Well, he didn't know. I don't think he could have realized, where's this all going to take me? So he went into hiding, and he avoided capture for 4 years. And they searched the world for him. There was advertisements and search teams and warrants for his arrest all over the whole planet. They thought he must have went to live in Kentucky. He must have been in the hills of Kentucky hiding. He must have went to Australia, where they own land in Australia. They must have went, the story really was that he was hiding in the Diamond House the whole time. And the Diamond House mansion was a 9,000 square foot mansion that he had built for himself. Rooms inside rooms and passageways and hidden vaults. And I restored that house top to bottom in 2004 with a team of 14 guys that took us a whole year. It's mind-blowing. It's like the Winchester Mansion, like very mysterious, very like exits everywhere, right? So he had people, and history shows that he had connections at the sheriff's department. He had connections at the state police. He had connections at the federal level that would set the message to the House of David to get him out of the way. They're coming. You know, the raids are coming or whatever. They even have colored lights on the top of Shiloh that the House of David members told me about that would say a certain color was warning, a certain color was it's safe, certain color was be on the lookout. And he could see those from Diamond House. So in reality, and I don't care what anybody tells you because I've interviewed the people for 30 years and I restored the Diamond House mansion, and with the help of the guidance of some of the members that had been there forever, and they told me stories that people probably wouldn't admit if they were real alive today members. But he avoided capture for 4 years until finally his lady, his number one connection, invited the raid on a certain day at a certain time. She knew exactly where Ben was going to be, and they came in with giant ramming bars. And when we restored the Diamond House mansion, there was still pieces of the wood that were broke off the double doors at the entrance from the raid. So they did catch him in 1926. He had tuberculosis by then. He was dying, right? So they brought him to trial. And they had rape charges, they had fraud charges against him. It was the most sensationalized trial of the 20th century by far. And so he went to war against all these accusations. Judge Dewhurst did a phenomenal job. Ultimately, after all the testimony, after all the court documents, they couldn't prove that he did anything. They couldn't prove it. So he was acquitted of all these rape charges that came before him. But they found him guilty of operating a religion under false pretenses for personal gain, calling him a religious fraud. So he went home on his hospital bed. That's how he laid in the courtroom, is on a hospital bed. And so he went home awaiting sentencing, but before he could be sentenced, he died. He died of tuberculosis. And at that point, here's a guy that just recruited you from whatever part of the world you were from, doing whatever you were doing. Come here, join me. I'm going to teach you how to live forever. We're going to walk into paradise. He dies. He never taught it. He never said anything about dying. He never told anybody he was going to die. And so, mass pandemonium. They didn't know what to believe, what to do.
They were obviously very upset, mourning his passing, and he passed on a Friday, on December 16th. And they didn't let anyone know that he had passed away until the following Monday.
They kept Benjamin wrapped in damp, warm towels and cloth for 8 days. At that point, the Barron County coroner and the authorities came in and said, you have to do something with his body. And so they embalmed his body and put him in a hermetically sealed glass coffin, like linen, over the Russian emperor. And he's still there to this day.
With the death of Benjamin, a power struggle has taken hold. As with most deaths of a leader, the question of who will take over is always the top concern. This wasn't any different for the House of David.
When Ben died, Mary, his wife, rightfully should have been able to take over the whole thing. She was there from before he got here. She was there putting his words into ink form. She was there by his side the whole entire way. She knew as much about the faith as he did, because he taught her from the time she was 16. So the rightful person that should have taken over was her, and she wanted to. But the Judge Dewhurst had other ideas.
It's curious that the House of David, they had lost membership during the 20s during all this turmoil and the trial. They had been a membership of over 1,000 at one time. But they were down, to less than 500. They divided 215 with Mary and 214 with Dewhurst.
He told the people, and I'm sure he had done all the legwork before knowing the writing on the wall, and a very, very, very smart guy, very savvy guy. And he said, no. A woman is not the head of this household. The Bible says the man is the head of the household. And people loved Dewhurst. They knew how powerful he was. They knew he had gotten Benjamin acquitted.
Sister Mary and her followers retained a great deal of the agricultural land and those kinds of farms and that sort of thing. They didn't keep High Island, which most of the people who left High Island actually followed Sister Mary. So it was kind of a surprise that they wouldn't have gotten that, but that stayed with Dewhurst, but it really was a losing proposition by that time.
So he went to trial and sued Mary for the leadership. And that trial went all the way to the Michigan Supreme Court. He won. And so sadly, Mary was evicted.
Kicked out of her own home, Mary didn't go too far. With some of the House of David holdings she retained, she started Mary's City of David just down the street.
They said, we're gonna leave, we're leaving. If Mary's leaving, we're leaving with you. With that group went a lot of the really genius minds and some of the greatest baseball players and a lot of the devout followers. And so the court said, Mary, you have to leave, but you can have the Rocky Weed Farm, which was a farm in Bering Springs. You can have the House of David Hotel, which he immediately changed the name to Mary's City of David Hotel, Mary's Fireproof Hotel. You can have this property, you can have this farm, and you can have half of the holdings in the bank. Well, imagine that those tens of millions now are like 160,000 in the bank. So she got like 80-some thousand to walk. And she walked across the street and down the road about 1,000 feet and started the Israelite House of David as reorganized by Mary Purnell, which later became Mary's City of David. And they were very successful. They had their own print shop, they had their own bakery, they had their own baseball team. She had her own Shiloh. She built cabins for the members in a big amphitheater, and they had their own band.
Dewhurst, of course, and his followers retained the Eden Springs Park. That was the big thing, and they had most all of the musicians, and of course the big major buildings there, the Shiloh, the Bethlehem, the Jerusalem, the Diamond House, and all of that kind of thing. That stayed with them, and it's not going to be long after that they're going to start expanding.
Dewhurst went on to major money enterprises and kind of expanded out west with some things that maybe he shouldn't have done. But he grew the money, but I think that's when the faith stopped. The faith recruiting stopped. They didn't preach anymore at the House of David. That was kind of when the music of the religion stopped, was when Dewhurst took over.
With the bedrock of the religion deteriorating, the House of David moved on more like a business, a corporation, so to speak. Even during this time of turmoil, the House of David and Mary's City of David continued to excel.
And those members continued to believe what they were taught by Ben, and they continued to play baseball better than anybody in America for a long time. They continued the amusement park through the early 70s. But when Dewhurst died in 1947, 20 years after Ben, they stopped taking new members. So the last member, Willie Robertson, joined in 1947 from Scotland. After that, that was it. So the last member that joined was also the last member that died, which is, what's the chance of that, right? So 70 years later. So there's no House of David original members left, There's a couple guys that were helping out there. One was a caregiver and one was helping with the bookkeeping that now joined. And at the City of David, where Mary was, there's Ron Taylor is the last guy standing. So, and that division that was formed between Judge Dewhurst and Mary was like the Berlin Wall, the East and West Germany love-hate relationship, where one family's over there, one family's right there. Maybe a brother and sister on both sides. Maybe a husband went this way and a wife went this way. So there was major animosity, very, very, very bitter for decades, and it's sad.
Over the years and a lot of decay, many changes have been made at the House of David, a part of history slowly fading into obscurity.
It makes me feel bad to see any building torn down, really, because that's our history. And you take those away, all you have is your photographs and your memories. And when they tore down Jerusalem and Bethlehem, the two buildings next to the main office, Shiloh, I really didn't like that. It just took part of history away.
Very early, I think around 1907 or so, or 05, they had a member joined by the name of Harry Kirkham that was a professional photographer, and Ben designated him to give his life to photos. That's all you do. All day, every day, is capture everything you see. And because he was a phenomenal photographer, he knew how to do settings, he knew how to stage things. He had his own photography studio right down in the park. So if you brought your kids and your wife for a day from Chicago, you could have a setting in their beautiful little setting park, and he would sell pictures of what he took from the park, and you could buy your own photos, and people do that to this day, right? And you pay a lot of money when you go to an amusement park, but they did that back in the very beginning. And because he was so devoted, and he was out there from the crack of dawn until it was closed, he was photographing people and life. And so I have over 10,000 photographs, and I don't have a fraction of what's out there. How many parts of American history have that available? Or maybe none. So that's an amazing thing. They say a photo is 1,000 words. Well, how multiply that times what he took. So it's extremely well documented history through photos, but they also documented everything.
When they tore down the cold storage plant, I pretty well had free reign. I could take anything I want, look at anything I want, because Dewhurst, his office was there. So it's got down in the basement, it was 2 foot of water, boxes stacked up on the skids. We got to go through all of that. That's where I found the letter Chris Ariano has about if Babe Ruth could come play for the House of David.
Because of their administration building and their minds, everything had a place and a purpose. And so I could go in there 25 years ago and meet with Howard Crossman, who was the business administrator, or Wilma, who was part of their office, and say, hey, I heard that Louis Armstrong came here way back and played at the park. Do we have any evidence of that? And they would go, well, let us look, Chris, and come back tomorrow. And I'd go back tomorrow. They'd have copies of checks, or they'd have the check that they checked, canceled check to Louis Armstrong. They'd have the sheets of when they booked him, and maybe copies of the posters or when they advertised. Unbelievable organization.
Dewhurst's secretary was really detailed. Her papers, if she got a letter and answered the letter, they'd both be right there.
And they prided themselves for that. I mean, every aspect of trains, food, music, entertainment, or farming, anything, there was a file, a place for it. So, and I'm sure that still to this day, it's still there, because, Greg Eversole and Brian Ziebart are both accountants. They're both CPA guys, so they're very organized too. So I'm sure they've maybe even done a greater job.
The truth is that no one will ever really know the full impact that the House of David has made on Benton Harbor and the world.
Well, sometimes extraordinary stories that you kind of think probably aren't all that legitimate, but they make good stories. I think if you talk to the remnant, they would say, we're not leaving anything behind. Still strong in the belief, and that they will be going into the millennium in a youthful body. Let's say if it doesn't happen that way, they're certainly leaving some good memories.
They showed us that even in the midst of a big, crazy world, you can have your own little world, and just kind of expand out from that. And that's what they did. They just wanted to share their world. I don't think it was always about their belief, but that there was a different way you could live. The humbleness and serving each other.
So I think the fact of the celibacy was terrible. And the fact that in 1947, when Dewhurst died, that was it. They didn't recruit new members. How in the world? Like, how are you going to go on? There's an end to that now, where there shouldn't be that. You should keep recruiting people. You should keep having babies. And if you believe in what Benjamin taught, someday paradise would come. But how can you say that, okay, this is the last person and it doesn't happen? And he had a teaching, I call it an out clause. He had a paragraph in his teachings that said the membership could get down to such a small number that you could fit all the members inside a closet before paradise comes.
I remember interviewing the little girl. Actually, she was in her 80s at the time. She said, I was so thrilled at the Granda Vista Motor Court. Remember, that is both sides of Red Arrow Highway. Beautiful. They have this huge fountain that every day will spew water to 7 levels in 7 different colors. And she could turn the switch to turn it on, and boom, up it goes. You can't, you just don't get enough opportunities to share that with someone.
In the beginning, I was kind of naive to their beliefs, so I would just ask, I don't understand, how could you even still believe that everybody's died? They're all died. Your whole family, all your friends are gone. How? I don't understand. And they would say, but Ben prophesied that the message is that the membership can get down to such a small number, there's only going to be a few of us that we could fit inside a closet. So they held to that until the very end. They never changed. So they died with that. They died with believing, which is, I guess, a beautiful thing. Those people that devoted their entire life, every minute of every day, to this faith. That's a pretty powerful thing.
At its heyday, at the height, it was something that was perfect for the time. I really kind of think that in any case, it wouldn't have survived anyway. I really don't. Because times changed, but the House of David never changed. It's definitely something that needs to be kept alive because of its unusualness. You don't see this anywhere else. I've never seen this anywhere else. And I've lived it all across the United States and been in different places. But this it's unique. It's so different than anything else. And so it's kind of sad to see it go. Frank Rossetti, he wasn't going to be around forever to do his Hydra Stone and his beautiful little statues and sculptures. These people weren't going to be around forever. And the sad thing was, they didn't have children to pass on their talents to. That's the real shame, I think.
I've thought about the story of the House of David and where it could have went. And 100%, if they would have just procreated. If they would have just knocked off that celibacy rule and let people have children to carry on, what's your future going to be? That's, in my opinion, it's like race suicide. I love the people. I loved them like they were my grandma and grandpas that I met later in life. So respect them. Most intelligent people probably ever met in my life, and I've met tens of thousands. Why didn't they change that part? And I know Benjamin taught celibacy, but he taught that, paradise was going to come in 1906, and then he said, okay, 1909, and okay, maybe 1919. So he kept backing that date up. So, it was confusion as to what was really going to happen. And I feel like if they would have just kept letting people have children and families, they would have grown like the Shakers and like the, many people that were ginormous. But the Shakers too were celibate.
I'm just one of many descendants of the members of the House of David. And I think we all carry a bit of that with us, no matter what, whether you believed in it or don't believe it, or however, we're all carrying a bit of that character. The characters that those people had were the most humble, gentle people. And and they instilled that too by just showing us how they lived.
It doesn't matter where I've ever spoken to people. People have come up to me and want to share something, want to share some memory that they had, something, interaction that they had with people there, what they got to do.
Telling incredible stories and keeping the past alive, Moondog Productions is proud to bring you the great history of the House of David in Southwest Michigan. Find out more about Moondog Productions by going online to moondogpro.net.
The House of David Museum is proud to tell the stories of Southwest Michigan's rich history. Located in St. Joseph, Michigan, the House of David Museum has a wide array of memorabilia for your viewing pleasure. To schedule a tour, call 269-325-0039.
Production support provided by the Blueberry Store, downtown South Haven, Michigan. The Blueberry Store offers all things blueberry, from gourmet blueberry products, fresh and frozen blueberries, as well as recipes. The Blueberry Store can be found at theblueberrystore.com.
Telling Southwest Michigan's history through radio and podcast. Rob Byrd's Moondog Show and the House of David podcast are happy to be a part of telling this great story. Find Rob Byrd's Moondog Show or the House of David podcast at podbean.com.